we're ready to glue our flute kit together. For this process, I have wood glue, I have 10 pinch clamps, I have my glue roller, my gloves, my palette to roll the glue out on, and a swab for swabbing the glue from the inside of the flute, as well as my kit. So I'm going to put my gloves on. The glue will stain your hands if you don't wear gloves, although it's really fun to peel off your fingers if you're if you're into that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to pour out a small amount of glue here. Remind myself that I'm only gluing one flute, so I don't need a huge amount of glue. And remember, when you pour out the glue, a lot of it's going to absorb into the roller. I have a wet roller here, so I'm going to grab a towel and dry this off really quick. Okay, so I'm going to roll out the glue. I'm going to load my roller by rolling like this. Rather than rolling back and forth, which only loads up part of it, I'm going to roll, roll, roll. If you've ever painted anything, you know this process. In my spare time, I'm a block print artist, so this is a really familiar feeling to me. We're looking for a thin layer that has that kind of nice tacky sound to it, if you can hear that. And my gluing surfaces are nice and clean here. I'm going to lay my kit side by side. You can have them touching like this, and you can just lightly hold on to one end with one hand and roll. Again, see, I'm not rolling back and forth, I'm rolling in one motion. I'm going to add a little more glue here. The trick is, now you can grab it and roll it the whole length. You don't want to get a glob of glue on this, or when you try to clamp them, they're going to slide. So it's probably going to be relatively impossible for you to see how much glue I have, but you see just a bit. Nice, even coat on the whole surface. Okay, so I'm going to place my flute side by side. I am looking at the Fipple hole here, both of them, to make sure that they're even. Don't focus on whether it's even up here, whether it's even at the bottom, although they should be even if your Fipple is even. We're just looking at that Fipple right now. I'm going to take a pinch clamp and I'm going to put one here. This is the glue seam, so I am clamping the glue seam together. In here. This is just to hold the flute in place while I make sure everything is aligned and while I start clamping the flute to keep it from sliding in one particular direction. So I'm taking a close look at the Fipple. I'm going to give you a quick peek. Nice and square. You don't want to see that out of alignment. So I can go ahead and start putting clamps along the body of the flute. I'm also going to just quickly feel the bore. Feels good. I'm going to put one there. One here. I'm going to remove this guy here. Now I'm going to remove this one. And I'm double checking. It's biting. I can see glue extruding. That means I put enough glue on there. And we haven't had anything shift. It doesn't take very long for the glue to start biting. So you just need to clamp it together for a second. This part is a little tricky. I'm going to put 6 clamps up here because if you remember what the inside of the flute looked like, we have more wood there. So we want to have more clamps to clamp all that together. So I am basically placing these so that they're on half. Be really careful because they can pop off and hurt you if you get the Well, you can see here I have one that's not quite on there all the way on the back side. So you want to be cautious about that. And then I'm going to double up and put them on this side, making sure that they're not sitting on top of each other. And of course they always do this cool thing where the pad flips right when you're trying to clamp. Okay. I'm checking. Got a nice amount of glue extruding everywhere on my glue seam, which is what I want to see. And my bore is still aligned and my fipples are still aligned. So I'm gonna quickly swab the inside of this, and then we're gonna let the glue dry for about an hour. You can even let it dry overnight if you want. If you have a Q-tip available, you can also use that to wipe the varnish from the fipples. It does not matter if varnish extrudes in here. This part of the flute, the slow air chamber, doesn't really have any effect on the voice of the flute. That's just the channel that air blows through. So you don't need to worry about glue extruding in that area. Okay, our flute is glued. Here we go. Now we wait. Okay, our flute is dry and we're ready to sand the outside of the flute and refine the fipple holes. So there's a couple different ways we can do this process. I'm going to show you what it looks like when your flute is dry. So you're going to have, you see this glue ridge on here? Sometimes if your flute has slipped at all, there might be an unevenness here where one side of the flute is higher than the other. But I basically have a thin ridge of glue that's extruded. So to get rid of that, you can either use a hand plane. This is a really little hand plane, but you could use that. A coarse sandpaper and a very flat surface to sand the flute. Or what I am going to do is I'm going to take it over to the belt sander and sand it because that is way, way faster. So let's take a minute to sand our flutes and we'll meet back here. Okay, our flute's all sanded now. And just to outline the process, on a belt sander, you want to hold the flute, I like to hold them like this, and push evenly down on the flute, rotate, and sand each side evenly until the glue is off and the flute is smooth. You want to avoid rocking the flute at all. And then you can also sand the mouth end by holding the flute vertically like this. Grip it down here with one hand and up here with one hand. And I recommend if the belt is going this direction, you have the fipple facing you and the belt will be pulling away from the fipple so that if any splinters are pulled off, they're pulled off the backside. That's probably not very relevant based on, we're gonna carve it anyway, but it looks nicer. So hold like this with a firm grip just for a minute to sand the mouth end smooth. And then your flute is going to be full of dust, so blow your flute out. And let's refine the fipple. I'm going to set my camera up a little closer so you can see what I'm doing with the files, and we'll meet back here. Okay, so we're gonna file the fipple holes on the flute. That's these square holes. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to file a ramp on the fipple hole that is closest to the blowhole. Find a file that fits in widthwise. This one is perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a firm downward pressure here. gonna try a coarser file. Looks perfect. I also want to file here. That's the top edge here. Just enough to remove any roughness. So first I'm going to take a couple downward strokes. My Fipple looks pretty square, but sometimes after you sand it, this top edge here will look a little uneven. So I'm going to square it a little bit. I am only going to stroke downwards with my file because cedar splinters very easily, and if you pull your file back up, you'll pull splinters up. So we're going to be pushing down only. Looks good. I'm going to just take a couple strokes here. This is on the upper edge here on the inside. Let's take a peek. Well, I don't know if I can show you this effectively, but looks smooth. That edge looks really smooth. Okay, another area that we need to clean up is this inner wall here. So the ramp, that wall right there, sometimes has a bead of glue on it. So I'm also only going to stroke downwards, just a few times. If you see any little fuzzies on the wall, you can use a little skinny file to just knock those off. Try not to widen the Fipple at all. Okay, I'm happy with the way this hole looks now. It's pretty clean and nice looking. We just did this one. Now we're going to move on to the more important hole, which is this one. I'm going to start with the back wall, which is, if you imagine that there's a chamber here that ends right here, I'm calling that the wall. So I'm going to file downwards only, and we're just filing to smooth the bead of glue. If your flute blank shifted at all, you may need to use the file to square this again. I'm putting pressure this direction to get a little bit more bite on my file here. That looks good. I didn't have very much glue extruded. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to square this part of the Fipple and smooth it. Again, we're only going to use a downward stroke. And we're going to try not to lengthen this very much yet, because we're not ready to lengthen that yet. So I'm going to stroke down, down, only stroke down. Pull your file away from the wall when you're pulling back up. You will get splinters. I'm going to reposition this to make it a little easier for my hands. Now I am filing the internal ramp here. That's where the wind breaks on your flute. And it is one of the most important parts of the flute. I see a little burr in here on the sidewall, so I'm going to take my little skinny guy here and I'm going to just knock that off. And kind of scrape along those walls, make sure that there isn't any burr. Okay, there's no way for me to show you this effectively, but this is now a nice smooth. I see a burr on the wall here. Let's get that off. Some of those burrs are gonna be impossible to clean up, but there's the blowhole, so that's where we're at here. We've got our little ramp here, and now we're looking up into the sound breaking edge of that Fipple. Looks good. It's totally smooth and square. I'm very happy with that. So that is how you refine your Fipple. I'm going to zoom out again and we can move on to the next part of the process. Okay, our Fipple holes have been refined and our flute is sanded on the outside. The next step is to enlarge the blowhole with a 1/4 inch drill bit and a handheld drill, and then to mark the fingering holes and drill them with a 3/16 drill bit. So in your booklet you will find a chart under step 4 that gives you the measurements for 3 different keys, the key of A, the key of G, and the key of F sharp. I'm going to tune this one to the key of G, so I'm just going to follow those measurements. Now we are going to be measuring from the back wall of the second Fipple hole from the blowhole. So it will show you in the book where to measure from, but essentially if you think about the flute as having a chamber that ends right here, that's where we're going to be measuring from. And we're going to try to place the measurements close to the center line of the flute. Sometimes you can see the glue line, so that will make it a little easier to get your fingering holes right down the center of the flute. But you can take a tape measure or a ruler, kind of notch it in there so you can feel that it is hitting that end of the flute there, right there, and measure the fingering holes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we will meet back here and we'll get those fingering holes drilled. So now that the fingering holes are marked, we want to take our flute over and cut it off to length, and you'll see the end cut off measurements here for the flutes. So I'm going to run over and do that really quick, and then I'll be right back to drill the fingering holes. Okay, my flute is cut to length. I am done marking the fingering holes, so I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff. And you can either use a handheld drill and very carefully try to drill right down the center of your flute, which sometimes you can see the glue line just a bit, so that'll make it easier. Or you can use a drill press if you have one. It might be helpful to use a ruler and draw a guideline. I'm just going to wing it though. When you're drilling the holes, try not to push all the way into the back wall of the flute. I'm doing it a little bit, but I'm not hitting it very hard. It's pretty hard to avoid doing that. Use a drill press if you have one. You'll get the holes much more precisely centered. For the 4-direction holes, you're going to transfer that measurement onto all 4 walls of the flute. You can do that by holding something and rotating the flute. I am going to use the drill press to drill these because it's a lot easier to get them precisely in the right place. So I will be back here in a moment with my flute fully drilled. Okay, my flute is fully drilled and I got the fingering holes pretty close to down the middle with a handheld drill. I think it would be quite a lot easier if you made a little guideline or made an actual guide for yourself. But if stuff is a little crooked, don't worry because you can fix it when you're enlarging the holes. So let's get ready to enlarge these fingering holes.